Betrayal and the Fall to the Crystal Forest. The year was 2221, and the Andromeda 14 spacecraft glided silently through the darkness of space. David Bobbins, a skilled engineer and explorer, stood by the observation deck, marveling at the brilliance of the unknown planet below. The shimmering hues of its atmosphere reflected in his wide eyes, a mix of wonder and excitement. "This is it, Ethan," David said, his voice filled with enthusiasm. "A completely uncharted planet. Can you imagine the discoveries waiting for us down there?" Ethan Carter, his longtime friend and the mission commander, gave a faint smile, though something darker lurked behind his gaze. "Yeah, David. A discovery that could change everything." David didn't notice the tension in Ethan's voice. He turned back to the observation window, lost in the beauty of the mysterious planet. The crystal formations look massive even from orbit. If we're right about the mineral deposits, this could be the breakthrough humanity needs. Suddenly, an alarm blared. David spun around, confusion flashing across his face. "What's going on?" Ethan stepped closer, his expression cold and resolute. "I'm sorry, David," he said, reaching for the emergency release lever. "But I can't let you take this from me." David's eyes widened in shock. "Ethan, what are you doing?" With a flick of his wrist, Ethan pulled the lever. The emergency hatch opened, and before David could react, a sudden force pulled him toward the void. He grasped at the edge, but Ethan's boot came down hard, kicking his grip loose. "You'll thank me later," Ethan muttered as David was sucked out into the cold abyss. David's body tumbled through the atmosphere, flames licking at his suit as he hurtled toward the alien planet below. His mind raced. Ethan had betrayed him, for credit, for glory, or something more sinister. The descent ended with a deafening crash as David landed in a forest unlike anything he had ever seen. Crystals, as tall as skyscrapers, shimmered in hues of blue, green, and violet. Their surfaces pulsed with light, creating a hauntingly beautiful symphony of colors. He groaned, his body aching but intact, thanks to his suit's impact-dampening technology. Pushing himself to his feet, he scanned the area. His universal translator activated, picking up faint noises in the distance. A strange mix of chirps and hums echoed through the forest. The air was dense, carrying a sweet yet unfamiliar scent. "I need to find shelter," David muttered, taking cautious steps forward. Each crystal emitted a soft hum when he touched it, as if alive. His sense of awe battled with the fear simmering in his chest. This planet was stunning, but it was also completely unknown, and dangerous. Suddenly, he froze. A shadow moved behind one of the larger crystals. David instinctively reached for the laser tool on his belt, gripping it tightly. "Who's there?" he called, his voice steady despite the fear pounding in his chest. The figure stepped into view, and David's breath caught. It was humanoid but undeniably alien. The being's vibrant blue skin glowed faintly under the crystalline light, and her long hair seemed to shimmer like molten gold. Her eyes, golden and luminous, locked onto his with an intensity that made him uneasy. Before he could react, the alien woman lunged. She was fast, unnervingly so, and pinned him to the ground in a flash. David struggled, his heart racing, but her strength was overwhelming. As her face came closer, he noticed the intricate markings on her skin, almost like a tattoo but glowing faintly. "You are, like me?" she said, her melodic voice filled with confusion and awe. David's universal translator kicked in, converting her words into English. What? "No, I'm human," he stammered. "What are you?" The woman tilted her head, her golden eyes scanning him with intense curiosity. "Human," she repeated, the word rolling off her tongue as if it were foreign yet familiar. A smile, shy yet captivating, spread across her face. "You are male." David blinked, unsure how to respond. Yeah. Last time I checked." Her smile widened, and she leaned closer. You are beautiful. David felt his cheeks flush. Thanks, I guess. You're not so bad yourself. The woman laughed softly, a sound that was both musical and disarming. I am Year, she said. You are the first male I have ever seen. Before David could process her words, she surprised him further by leaning in and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was gentle but charged with emotion. David froze, unsure whether to pull away or reciprocate. When she finally withdrew, her eyes sparkled with a mix of joy and reverence. You are the one, Year said, her voice trembling with excitement. You are perfect to be our king. David's jaw dropped. Wait, what? King? There's been some kind of mistake. Year shook her head, her smile unwavering. No mistake. You are male. You are strong. You are destined. Before he could protest further, she grabbed his hand and pulled him to his feet. Come. The others must see you. David hesitated, but the look in Year's eyes was both sincere and commanding. He allowed himself to be led through the crystalline forest, each step feeling like a journey deeper into the unknown. As they walked, David's mind raced. Betrayed by Ethan, stranded on a hostile alien world, and now declared king by a woman who claimed he was the first male she'd ever seen. His life had taken a turn he could never have predicted. One thing was certain, his adventure had only just begun. David followed Year through the crystalline forest, each step stirring a mix of curiosity and unease. The alien woman moved with a graceful urgency, her golden hair shimmering like liquid light. David couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was happening, though he still couldn't make sense of it. His thoughts raced as he struggled to comprehend the situation. The planet's beauty was undeniable, but it was also alien, and he felt a growing unease about what lay ahead. The forest around them pulsed with life. The crystals seemed alive, resonating with a low hum that made the air vibrate softly. David noticed small, luminous creatures darting between the trees, their movements quick and deliberate. Some resembled insects, while others seemed like floating orbs of light. Year seemed unbothered by them, her focus entirely on guiding him forward. David finally broke the silence. Year, where are we going? Who are these others you mentioned? She glanced back at him, her golden eyes glowing with excitement. The Zoran. My people. They must see you. You are their hope. David frowned. Their hope for what? You keep calling me a king, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. He paused, remembering his betrayal. The image of Ethan pushing him out of the ship replayed in his mind. His voice grew softer. I'm just a man trying to survive. Year slowed her pace, her expression softening. You are more than you realize. The Zoran have waited generations for someone like you. We thought we were cursed, destined to fade away. But now, you are here. David opened his mouth to argue but stopped when the forest thinned, revealing an awe-inspiring sight. Ahead of them lay a village, if it could be called that. Structures made entirely of glowing crystals rose into the sky, their surfaces shimmering in hues of blue and violet. The buildings looked as though they had grown naturally from the ground, their shapes organic and fluid. The air buzzed with a strange energy, and David felt a tingling sensation on his skin. The inhabitants of the village began to emerge, their blue skin and golden eyes mirroring Year's. Dozens of them stepped forward, their movements slow and cautious, as though they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Murmurs filled the air, their language a melodic blend of tones and hums. David's translator struggled to keep up, but he caught fragments: male, destiny, hope. One figure stepped forward from the crowd. She was taller than the others, her silver hair shimmering under the crystalline light. She carried a staff made of the same glowing material, its tip pulsing faintly with energy. Her presence commanded respect, and the other Zoran lowered their heads as she approached. Year, the woman said, her voice firm but kind. You have returned. And you have brought him. Yer nodded, her excitement barely contained. Matriarch Liera, this is the one I told you about. He is male. He is human. Liera's golden eyes studied David intently, her gaze piercing yet unreadable. David felt a strange pressure, as though she could see straight into his soul. Finally, she smiled, though it was a solemn gesture. Welcome, human. I am Liera, leader of this tribe. You must have many questions. David nodded, his voice steady despite the whirlwind in his mind. I do. But first, I need to understand why everyone here seems to think I'm their king. Liera's smile deepened, though sadness lingered in her eyes. Our people have suffered for generations. A plague swept through our kind long ago, claiming all our males and leaving us on the brink of extinction. For centuries, we have searched for a way to survive, but without males, our future seemed hopeless. Until now. David felt the weight of her words, the enormity of the situation settling over him. You think I can help you rebuild your species? He asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Liera nodded. Not think. No. Your presence here is no coincidence. The ancient texts speak of a male who would come from beyond the stars to save us. You are that male. David shook his head, his mind reeling. This is insane. I didn't come here to save anyone. I was betrayed, pushed out of my ship by someone I trusted. I'm stranded here just like you. Liera's expression softened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. Stranded or not, you are here. And we believe in you. Before David could respond, the crowd erupted in cheers. The Zoran fell to their knees, bowing before him as though he were a god. David's chest tightened, the enormity of their faith weighing heavily on him. He looked at Yer, who stood by his side with an expression of pure joy. I didn't ask for this, David muttered, his voice barely audible. Yer leaned closer, her voice gentle. Sometimes, destiny chooses us, whether we are ready or not. As the Zoran celebrated, David's mind raced with conflicting emotions. He had always dreamed of making a difference, of leaving a mark on the universe, but not like this. Not as a king to a species he barely understood. Yet, as he looked at the faces around him, filled with hope and reverence, he realized that he couldn't turn his back on them. For better or worse, they believed in him, and that belief gave him a purpose he hadn't felt in years. Taking a deep breath, David stepped forward, raising his hands to quiet the crowd. I don't know if I'm the one you've been waiting for, he said, his voice carrying over the murmurs. But if there's a chance I can help you, then I'll do my best. The Zoran erupted into cheers once more, their voices harmonizing in a way that sent shivers down David's spine. He glanced at Yer, who smiled warmly and took his hand. You have already given us hope, she said. David nodded, though uncertainty still gnawed at him. As he stood among the glowing crystals and the adoring Zoran, one thought dominated his mind. What had he just agreed to? David awoke to the soft hum of the Zoran village as the first rays of an alien sunrise filtered through the crystalline structures. The air was cool, tinged with the faint, sweet aroma of the forest. Despite the serenity around him, his mind was far from calm. He had spent the night in a crystalline dwelling, a gift from the Zoran, who were eager to honor their new king. Sleep had come in fleeting moments, interrupted by thoughts of his betrayal, his unlikely role among the Zoran, and the immense responsibility now resting on his shoulders. A soft knock at the doorway pulled him from his thoughts. Yer entered, her golden eyes glowing softly in the morning light. She carried a tray of fruits that shimmered like gemstones, their vibrant colors reflecting the light in dazzling patterns. You didn't eat much last night, she said, setting the tray down. These will give you strength. David managed a small smile. Thanks. I'm not exactly used to food that looks like it belongs in a museum. Yer laughed, her melodic voice filling the room. They taste better than they look. Try this one. She handed him a small, oval fruit with a translucent blue skin. David hesitated but took a bite. The fruit burst with flavor, sweet and slightly tangy, and he couldn't help but let out a satisfied sigh. Okay, that's actually amazing. Year's smile widened. Good. You'll need your strength today. The council is eager to meet with you. David frowned. Council? Yes, she said. The leaders of our people. They will want to discuss the future, our future, with you. David leaned back, running a hand through his hair. Great. No pressure. Year stepped closer, her expression softening. You don't have to do this alone, David. The Zoran are with you. I am with you. Her words brought him some comfort, though the weight of his new role still loomed large. After finishing the fruit, David rose and followed Year through the village. The crystalline structures sparkled in the sunlight, casting rainbows across the ground. The Zoran villagers paused to watch him pass, their expressions a mix of awe and hope. David tried to ignore the knot in his stomach as he entered the grand hall where the council awaited. The hall was breathtaking, its walls made entirely of luminous crystals that pulsed gently with energy. At the center of the room sat 6 Zoran leaders, each radiating an air of authority. Liera, the matriarch, stood at the forefront, her silver hair glowing like moonlight. Welcome, David, she said, her voice steady and warm. We are honored to have you here. David nodded, doing his best to appear confident. Thank you. I'm still trying to wrap my head around all of this. Liera gestured for him to sit. That is understandable. You have been thrust into a role you did not seek. But destiny often works in ways we cannot predict. The other leaders introduced themselves in turn. There was Saris, a sharp-eyed strategist, Arala, a healer with a calming presence, Tiran, a guardian whose muscular frame exuded strength, Vinera, the historian who carried an air of wisdom, and Kalis, a visionary with piercing eyes that seemed to see beyond the present. Each offered David a warm welcome, though he could sense the weight of their expectations. Liera began the meeting with a question that caught David off guard. What do you know of leadership, David? He hesitated, unsure how to respond. I've worked on teams before, but I've never led a group like this. I'm an engineer, not a king. Vinera leaned forward, her golden eyes glinting. Leadership is not about titles or experience. It is about understanding the needs of your people and guiding them toward a better future. Tell us, what do you see as the greatest challenge we face? David thought for a moment before answering. From what I've heard, your survival is at stake. Without males, your species is on the brink of extinction. That's a lot to take in, honestly. But if I'm going to help, I need to understand more about your culture, your history, and what you need from me. The council exchanged approving glances. Saris spoke next, his voice sharp and precise. You speak with wisdom. Our survival depends on unity and adaptability. The arrival of a male among us is unprecedented, but it also presents an opportunity, a chance to rebuild. Arala added, but rebuilding is not enough. We must heal, not just our bodies but our hearts. Our people have endured so much loss. Your presence gives them hope, David. Tiran nodded. Hope is powerful. But so is strength. We must prepare for the challenges ahead. The forest is not as peaceful as it seems, and we do not know what other dangers may come. David listened intently, their words painting a picture of a people who had faced immense hardship yet remained resilient. He felt a growing sense of respect for the Zoran and their determination to survive. When the council asked for his thoughts, he took a deep breath and spoke from the heart. I don't have all the answers, he admitted. But I know this, if we work together, we can find a way forward. I'm not here to rule over you. I'm here to help, to learn, and to do whatever I can to ensure your survival. Liera smiled, her expression filled with pride. Spoken like a true leader. The council concluded the meeting with a sense of unity, their faith in David reaffirmed. As he left the hall, Yer walked beside him, her golden eyes glowing with admiration. "You were incredible," she said. "The council respects you. That's not an easy thing to earn." David let out a small laugh. "I'm just trying to keep up. Honestly, I'm still terrified." Yer stopped and placed a hand on his arm. "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to move forward despite it. And you, David, have courage." Her words stayed with him as they returned to the village. For the first time since his arrival, David felt a flicker of hope, not just for the Zoran, but for himself. He still didn't know what the future held, but he was determined to face it head-on. The days that followed were a whirlwind for David. His mornings began with lessons from Vinera, the historian, who patiently explained the Zoran's history, culture, and the plague that had devastated their species. Afternoons were spent in training sessions with Tiran, the guardian, who taught him how to navigate the forest and defend himself against its many dangers. Evenings were reserved for council meetings, where strategies for rebuilding the tribe were discussed. David quickly realized the Zoran were not just survivors, they were fighters. Despite their losses, they had preserved their knowledge, their traditions, and their hope. Yet, he could see the strain on their faces, the weariness of a people who had carried the weight of extinction for generations. It was in their eyes when they looked at him, not just hope, but desperation. He was determined not to let them down. One afternoon, Tiran led David deep into the forest for a lesson on survival. The towering crystalline trees cast shifting patterns of light across the ground, and the air hummed with the soft resonance of their energy. "You must always be vigilant," Tiran said, her voice firm. "The forest is alive, but not all of its inhabitants are friendly." As if on cue, a low growl rumbled through the air. David froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the laser tool at his belt. From behind a cluster of glowing ferns emerged a creature unlike anything he had seen before. It stood on 4 legs, its body covered in scales that shimmered like liquid metal. Its eyes glowed with an eerie red light, and its jagged teeth glistened in the soft forest glow. Tiran stepped forward, her stance calm but ready. "Do not run," she said. "It will only provoke it." The creature snarled, lowering its head as if preparing to charge. David's heart raced, but he forced himself to stay still, following Tiran's lead. She slowly raised a crystal-tipped staff, its surface pulsing with energy. The creature hesitated, its glowing eyes flicking between Tiran and David. In a sudden burst of movement, Tiran thrust the staff forward, releasing a pulse of energy that sent the creature skittering back. It let out a guttural growl before retreating into the shadows. David exhaled, his hands trembling. "What was that thing?" "A shard beast," Tiran replied. "They are territorial and dangerous, but they can be deterred if you remain calm and show strength." David nodded, his respect for Tiran growing. "I'll try to remember that." As they continued their trek, David couldn't shake the feeling that the shard beast wasn't the only threat lurking in the forest. The encounter had been a stark reminder of how vulnerable he was in this alien world. He needed to adapt, and fast. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the village in shades of gold and violet, David met with Yer on the outskirts of the settlement. She had been a constant presence at his side, her unwavering support a source of comfort amid the chaos. "You're quiet tonight," Yer said, her golden eyes studying him. David shrugged, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Just thinking. About everything. About whether I can really do this." Yer stepped closer, her expression soft. "You're doing more than you realize. The council believes in you. The people believe in you." David looked at her, his brow furrowed. "But what if I fail? What if I can't be what they need?" Yer reached out, taking his hand in hers. "You won't fail. You have already given us hope, and that is something we have not felt in a long time. Hope is powerful, David. It can move mountains, heal wounds, and bring a people back from the brink. Her words resonated deeply with him. For all his doubts and fears, he couldn't deny the impact he was already having. The Zoran had placed their faith in him, and he owed it to them to try. That night, as the village gathered around the central fire, a shimmering column of light and energy, David made a decision. He stood, raising his hands to quiet the murmurs of the crowd. I've spent the past few days learning about your people, your history, and the challenges you face, he began, his voice steady. I won't pretend I have all the answers, and I won't promise that this will be easy. But I can promise you this, I will do everything in my power to help you rebuild, to ensure your survival, and to create a future where the Zoran can thrive. The villagers erupted into cheers, their voices harmonizing in a hauntingly beautiful melody. David felt a swell of emotion as he looked out at the sea of faces, their eyes shining with hope. For the first time since his arrival, he felt like he belonged. Yer stepped forward, her smile radiant. You have already begun to unite us, David. And unity is the first step toward rebuilding. As the night wore on, David found himself sitting by the fire, surrounded by the Zoran leaders. They spoke of their plans, their dreams, and the steps needed to secure their future. For the first time, David felt a glimmer of confidence. He didn't know what the road ahead would bring, but he was ready to face it. As the firelight danced across the crystalline village, casting long shadows and brilliant hues, David's resolve solidified. He was no longer just a stranded engineer. He was a leader, a symbol of hope, and perhaps even a king. And he would not fail. The following morning, David rose early, his mind already buzzing with ideas. He had spent the night piecing together fragments of Zoran history, engineering concepts, and strategies to ensure their survival. The Zoran were resourceful, but their reliance on the crystalline environment left them vulnerable to its dangers. If they were to thrive, they needed to adapt and expand beyond the limits of their current knowledge. David met with the council in the grand hall, his voice steady despite the weight of their expectant gazes. We need to think bigger, he began. The village is incredible, but it's not enough. If we stay here, we're exposed, to the shard beasts, to resource shortages, to anything this planet throws at us. We need to build, innovate, and create something that can protect and sustain us for generations. Liera nodded, her expression thoughtful. And how do you propose we achieve this? David paused, glancing at the glowing walls around him. The crystals, he said. They're more than just structures. They hum, they resonate, they pulse with energy. I think we can harness that energy, turn it into a power source, something we can use to build defenses, grow food, and maybe even communicate beyond this planet. The council exchanged intrigued glances. Vinera, the historian, leaned forward. The crystals have always been sacred to us, but we have never fully understood their potential. If you believe they can help us, we should explore the possibilities. Tiran, the guardian, crossed her arms, her expression cautious. Exploring is one thing, but what about the risks? If we tamper with the crystals, we could upset the balance of the forest. David met her gaze. You're right. That's why we'll proceed carefully, testing small-scale systems before implementing anything larger. But if we don't take this chance, we'll be stuck reacting to threats instead of preparing for them. After a lengthy discussion, the council agreed to proceed with David's plan. The village buzzed with activity as the Zoran worked together to gather resources and prepare for the experiments. David's engineering background proved invaluable, and he quickly became a central figure in the effort. Yer was by his side every step of the way, her unwavering faith in him a constant source of encouragement. Together, they mapped out the village, identifying areas where the crystal energy could be harnessed most effectively. Yer's knowledge of the forest proved indispensable, and David found himself relying on her more than he expected. As the days turned into weeks, the first signs of progress began to emerge. Using a combination of crystal fragments and salvaged components from David's suit, they built a rudimentary energy converter. When they activated it, the village erupted in cheers as a small, steady light emanated from the device. David couldn't help but grin. It's a start. The Zoran celebrated the breakthrough, their spirits lifted by the tangible proof of progress. But David knew this was only the beginning. The converter was a small step, and the challenges ahead would be far greater. One evening, as the village basked in the glow of their newfound light, David found himself sitting with Yer under the largest crystal tree. The stars above were brighter than he had ever seen, their light filtering through the tree's branches in a mesmerizing display. "You've done so much for us already," Yer said, her voice soft. "The village feels alive again." David shook his head. "We've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to do." Yer reached out, placing a hand on his. "You've given us hope, David. That's more than enough." He looked at her, her golden eyes reflecting the light of the stars. For a moment, the weight of his responsibilities faded, replaced by a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," he admitted. Yer smiled, her touch lingering. "We are stronger together." Their moment of quiet was interrupted by a sudden commotion near the edge of the village. Shouts echoed through the air, and David and Yer sprang to their feet, rushing toward the noise. When they arrived, they found Tyran and several other guardians surrounding a figure lying on the ground. David's breath caught as he recognized the battered and unconscious form of Ethan Carter. Tyran looked up, her expression grim. "We found him near the forest's edge. He's injured but alive." David's emotions roiled. Anger, confusion, and a strange sense of relief battled for dominance. Ethan, the man who had betrayed him, was now at the mercy of the Zoran. "What do we do with him?" Yer asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. David stared down at Ethan, memories of his betrayal flashing through his mind. Part of him wanted to leave Ethan to his fate, but another part, the part that had bonded with the Zoran and their sense of unity, urged him to act differently. He took a deep breath, his decision clear. "We help him. But we need answers." The Zoran carried Ethan to one of the healing chambers, where Arala began treating his wounds. David stayed outside, his mind racing. Ethan's arrival raised more questions than answers. How had he survived? Why was he here? And, most importantly, could he be trusted? As the night deepened, David stood alone, staring at the distant forest. The stars above seemed to flicker, as if warning him that the road ahead would be even more treacherous than he had imagined. But he wasn't alone anymore. He had the Zoran, their hope, and their strength. And with that, he was ready to face whatever came next. Ethan stirred on the crystalline table, his face pale and bruised. Arala worked tirelessly, her hands glowing faintly as she tended to his wounds. David stood nearby, his arms crossed, watching the man who had betrayed him. The sight stirred a storm of emotions, anger, resentment, and a flicker of curiosity. How had Ethan survived, and why was he here? Arala finished her work and turned to David. "He will recover, but his body is weak. Whatever he endured out there nearly broke him." David nodded, his jaw tight. "I need answers." As if on cue, Ethan's eyes fluttered open. He groaned, his gaze unfocused at first, but then his expression shifted when he saw David. Fear, guilt, and relief flickered across his face. "David," Ethan rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "You're alive." David stepped closer, his tone sharp. "Barely. Thanks to you." Ethan winced, attempting to sit up, but his body protested. I didn't think you'd survive. I thought," he trailed off, his gaze dropping. David clenched his fists. "You thought you could get rid of me, take the credit for our discovery, and leave me to die." Ethan shook his head weakly. "It wasn't like that. I I had no choice. No choice. David snapped. You pushed me out of the ship, Ethan. You made a choice. Ethan's eyes glistened with unshed tears. You don't understand. They made me do it. David's anger faltered, replaced by confusion. Who? What are you talking about? Ethan swallowed hard, his voice trembling. The Syndicate. They found out about the planet. They wanted it for themselves. They threatened my family, David. If I didn't eliminate you and claim the discovery, they would have killed them. David stared at Ethan, his mind racing. The Syndicate, a shadowy organization with deep pockets and a reputation for ruthlessness. Their interest in the planet explained Ethan's betrayal, but it didn't excuse it. You should have told me, David said, his voice quieter but no less firm. We could have found another way. Ethan's shoulders slumped. I know. I was scared. I thought I could handle it, but everything went wrong. After I pushed you out, the ship was attacked by something. I barely escaped in a pod. David's eyes narrowed. Attacked? By what? I don't know, Ethan said, his voice breaking. It was fast, powerful, like nothing I've ever seen. The pod landed here, and I've been running ever since. The forest, it's alive, David. It tried to kill me. David frowned, his anger giving way to a gnawing sense of unease. The shard beasts were dangerous, but what Ethan described sounded far worse. Could there be something else lurking on the planet, something even the Zoran didn't know about? Yer entered the chamber, her presence grounding David. She looked at Ethan with a mix of curiosity and wariness. Is he telling the truth? She asked. David sighed. I think he is. At least about the Syndicate and the attack. The rest. I don't know. Yer stepped closer to Ethan, her golden eyes piercing. Your actions have brought pain to David, but if you are here now, it means the forest has spared you. That is not without reason. Ethan looked at her, confusion etched on his face. Who are you? I am Yer, she said, her voice calm yet firm. And you are in the care of the Zoran, the people you would have doomed with your greed. Ethan flinched, guilt flashing in his eyes. I didn't know. I didn't understand. Yer's expression softened slightly. Perhaps. But now you must prove yourself. Words alone will not earn our trust. David nodded in agreement. She's right. If you want to make this right, you'll have to help us. Ethan hesitated but then nodded weakly. I'll do whatever it takes. The following days were tense as Ethan recovered. The Zoran watched him warily, their trust hard-earned and easily broken. David divided his time between overseeing the energy project and keeping an eye on Ethan, who seemed genuinely remorseful but carried an air of unease. One evening, as the village gathered for a meeting, Zoran returned from a patrol, her expression grim. There's something in the forest, she announced. Something unnatural. The room fell silent as she continued. I found traces of movement, massive, deliberate. And the shard beasts are agitated, avoiding certain areas. It's as if something has claimed territory, and they're afraid. David exchanged a glance with Yer. Could it be what attacked Ethan's ship? Possibly, Zoran said. But whatever it is, it's getting closer. The council deliberated late into the night, their voices hushed but urgent. They decided to fortify the village, using the newly harnessed crystal energy to power defenses. David worked alongside the Zoran, constructing barriers and setting up energy fields to repel intruders. Even Ethan pitched in, his actions speaking louder than his words. As the sun set, casting the village in shades of amber and violet, David stood at the edge of the settlement, staring into the dense forest. He could feel the tension in the air, a quiet before the storm. Yer joined him, her presence a calming force. Do you think we're ready? She asked. David shook his head. I don't know. But we'll face it together. As night fell, the forest seemed to come alive with an eerie hum. The crystal trees pulsed faintly, their light flickering as if warning of an impending threat. David gripped his laser tool tightly, his heart pounding as the shadows between the trees grew darker and more ominous. Whatever was out there was coming. And this time, there would be no running. The night descended over the Zoran village like a heavy shroud, the usual serene hum of the crystal trees replaced by a tense, rhythmic vibration. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. The Zoran gathered in the central square, their faces lit by the faint glow of the crystal energy barriers David and the council had erected. The barriers pulsed with an electric blue light, casting eerie shadows that flickered across the crystalline buildings. David stood at the forefront, flanked by Yer, Tiran, and the other council members. Ethan lingered at the edge of the group, his expression a mixture of fear and guilt. In the distance, a deep, guttural sound echoed through the forest, sending shivers down David's spine. It's coming, Tiran said, her voice low but steady. She gripped her staff tightly, the crystal at its tip glowing faintly. David took a deep breath, forcing his fear aside. Stay together. We've prepared for this. The barriers will hold. You placed a hand on his shoulder. Your strength gives us strength, she said softly. We will face this together. The sound grew louder, a steady, rhythmic pounding that reverberated through the ground. The trees at the edge of the village began to sway, their crystalline branches clinking together like a macabre wind chime. Then, the figure emerged. It was massive, easily twice the size of the shard beasts David had seen before. Its body was covered in jagged, obsidian-like armor that reflected the light in sharp, menacing angles. Its eyes burned with a fiery red glow, and its movements were deliberate and predatory. The creature let out a deafening roar, the sound shaking the very ground beneath them. The Zoran warriors stepped forward, their staffs at the ready. The creature hesitated, its gaze sweeping over the glowing barriers. It let out another roar, then charged. The impact against the barrier sent a shockwave rippling through the village. The barrier held, but the strain was evident as cracks of energy flickered along its surface. David shouted over the noise. Focus the energy to the weak points. Don't let it through. Yer and the other leaders acted quickly, channeling their combined energy into the barrier. The creature snarled, its massive claws scraping against the energy field as it tried to push through. The hum of the crystals grew louder, the air thick with tension. Ethan, standing at the edge, suddenly stepped forward. I know how to stop it, he shouted. David turned to him, his expression skeptical. What are you talking about? The syndicate sent me with an emergency override signal, Ethan explained, holding up a small device. It's meant to disrupt hostile entities. I didn't use it before because I didn't think I'd survive the crash. But if we amplify it through the crystal network, it might work. David hesitated. Trusting Ethan was a gamble, but they had no other options. He nodded sharply. Do it. Ethan rushed to the central crystal tower, David close behind him. Together, they connected the device to the energy converter. The crystals flared brighter as the device synced with their energy, emitting a low, rhythmic pulse. Outside, the creature roared again, slamming against the barrier. Cracks of red energy flickered through its obsidian armor, as if it were feeding on its own rage. The barrier was starting to falter. It's ready. Ethan shouted. David grabbed the controls, his heart pounding. Let's hope this works. He activated the device. A sharp, resonant sound burst from the crystals, a frequency that seemed to cut through the very air. The creature froze, its movements jerky and uncoordinated. It let out a piercing shriek, clawing at its own head as the sound intensified. The Zoran watched in stunned silence as the creature staggered backward, its fiery eyes dimming. With one final, desperate roar, it collapsed, its massive body hitting the ground with a thunderous crash. The village was silent, save for the faint hum of the crystals. David exhaled, his hands trembling as he turned to Ethan. It worked. Ethan nodded, relief washing over his face. Yeah. It worked. The Zoran erupted into cheers, their voices harmonizing in a melody of victory and relief. David and Ethan stepped out of the tower, greeted by Yer and the council. Yer's eyes glistened with tears as she embraced David. You saved us, she said, her voice filled with gratitude. We all did, David replied, his gaze sweeping over the Zoran. This was a team effort. Liera stepped forward, her expression solemn but proud. Tonight, you proved yourself not just as a leader but as one of us. The Zoran owe you their lives. David nodded, humbled by her words. I owe you just as much. You gave me a purpose when I had nothing. Ethan stepped forward hesitantly, his gaze lowered. David. I'm sorry. For everything. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. David studied him for a long moment before placing a hand on his shoulder. You took the first step tonight. Keep going. The night turned to dawn, the village bathed in the golden light of the rising sun. The Zoran began to rebuild, their spirits renewed. The creature's remains were carefully dismantled, its obsidian armor repurposed to strengthen the village's defenses. As David stood at the edge of the village, watching the forest awaken with light and life, Yer joined him. She looked at him with a smile that spoke of hope and trust. What's next? She asked. David chuckled softly. I don't know. But whatever it is, we'll face it together. Yer nodded, her golden eyes shining. Together. As the Zoran worked to secure their future, David felt a sense of belonging he had never known before. He was no longer just a stranded engineer or a reluctant king. He was part of something bigger, a family, a legacy, a beacon of hope. And together, they would build a new world.